Welcome everyone to the Yom HaShoah program this year as we commemorate the 6.5 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. What should we be focused on as B'nai Torah and as aspiring Avdei Hashem? So I had a similar situation come up in my own life a few years ago, where I had to think also in my own life, how should I think and what should be going through my mind? Mirz Hashem, all of you will have the opportunity at some point in the future to go through the camps, to experience the death and destruction of Auschwitz, where 800,000 Jews were killed, to experience a place like Treblinka, where 1.3 million Jews were killed, to experience a place like Majdanek, where you see the ashes that used to be Jews who were killed alive. And the question for me as a 19-year-old boy going through these places and experiencing places of death and destruction, places where hope was lost for so many, the question was, what should I be thinking about? What should be going through my mind as I experience such horrors? And there's one idea that when I was 19 that I kept thinking about, and it's perhaps can help us frame what today is all about in terms of how we relate to Yom HaShoah in our Avodas Hashem. It used to be, until the year 1993, that if you were to open up a New York Times, that on the front page of the New York Times it would say every single Friday, this week, Jewish women should light candles at 5:19 or whatever the time was that week. Until the year 1993, when the person that was paying for this every single week was consolidating some of his funds, so he stopped paying for it. But then came the year 2000. And in January 1st, 2000, the New York Times put out a three-pronged front page edition of their newspaper. First, they had an exact replica of January 1st, 1900, whatever was going on then. Then they had a current events edition of January 1st, 2000, whatever was going on then. But then they had a futuristic edition, January 1st, 2100, what's going to be happening in 100 years from now? And in this front page futuristic edition of the New York Times, they had things like cars to hit the sky for the very first time, or robots going to the voting polls. And in this futuristic edition of the New York Times, one of the things that they included was, on the front page, Jewish women should light candles tonight at 5:19. And someone asked the head editor of the New York Times at the time, this Roman Catholic individual, who paid this money to have this one-liner on this futuristic edition of the New York Times? This non-Jewish man replied as follows, and he said that when deciding what should be in our futuristic edition, it's very hard to know what's going to be around in 100 years from now. But the one thing that I can guarantee with an absolute and unadulterated level of certainty is that in 100 years from now, Jewish women are still going to be lighting candles on Friday night because the Jewish people are eternal and there is no one that can take that away from them. So when a kid like me is going through and experiencing the horrors of the Holocaust, I kept thinking in my mind's eye about how as much destruction as Hitler and the Nazis and Machshemam tried to do and ultimately did, we continue to light candles on Friday night. We continue to learn Torah, we continue to do mitzvahs, we continue to bring the light of the Ribbon Shalom into the world, despite those alive and kicking today who still try to destroy us and who still try to stop us from bringing Hashem into the world. And to me, that's what Yom HaShoah is. It's not just a day about remembering what was, but it's a day about remembering what can be. It's a day about remembering and allowing the tears of Yom HaShoah not just to stay and to remain here today, but the tears should move us, the tears should inspire us, the tears should encourage us to continue to bring Hashem into the world and to have the 6.5 million Jews who were killed in our hearts and in our minds when we do it. We have the opportunity right now to hear from a few of our Talmidim, to hear from Rav Shrechter Shlita, descendants of Holocaust survivors. And there are three reasons why this can be incredibly powerful on a day like today. Number one, it helps personalize what Yom HaShoah is. It helps us recognize and realize that Yom HaShoah isn't something simply that affected other people, but it affected our Talmidim, it affected our rebbaim. It affected those who we daven next to and learn with each and every day. Number two, it gives us a sense of what the Nazis in Hashoah tried to destroy. That if they would have known that a place like Heichal HaTorah, that if they would have known that boys like Akiva and Hillel Fried, like Akiva Snetal, like Eitan Smiley, like Rav Shechter Shlita, if they would have known that boys like these would have been born, then that would have caused the greatest pain to the Nazis, and Baruch Hashem, they're able to be living examples as they continue to perpetuate the values of their great-grandparents and grandparents who, Baruch Hashem, survived the Holocaust. And the third reason why it's helpful and important on a day like today to hear from our fellow Talmidim and rebbaim is because it helps put into perspective how truly catastrophic the Shoah was. When we think about not only the 6.5 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, but how many descendants could have been. How many more Akiva Fried and Hillel Frieds could there have been? How many more Akiva Snitaus and Eitan Smilos and Rav Shechter could there have been? And that's also what we're mourning today. That's also what we're meant to think about and focus on and mourn on Yom HaShoah. This time I'd like to ask Akiva and Hillel Fried, Eitan Smilo, Akiva Snitau, and Rav Shechter to please come up and share their stories.
Thank you, Rabbi Rose. Our names are Hillel and Akiva Fried, and we are proud descendants of Holocaust survivors. We say that we are proud because we know that the hardships and terror that our families faced did not deter them from rebuilding and fostering Jewish values and a love of Hashem in our family. Our great-grandfather, Ephraim and Rav Asher Heichal and Arko Hershkowitz, or as we call them, Super Zaidi, was born in Rosario, Romania. He was the youngest child of 11. His father was a Rebbe, and his mother, Elka, not only took care of the family and farm, but ran the community mikveh. Before the Nazis even came to their town, the Hungarian army was very cruel. Besides the taunting and constant beating, it was the Hungarians who ripped the payas off of his face. After one of the beatings, they damaged his ribs and lungs. When the Nazis came, his family was sent to a ghetto. After a short time there, he was sent by train to the first of many labor camps and concentration camps. As they were being shoved onto the trains, our Super Zaidi saw his mother being beaten to death because she was protecting her grandchild. When he cried out to his father told him that it was only a nightmare, and his father then told him, the Eibishter is dein Tata, your father. And when the father heard his children, his father held him and made him promise that no matter what will happen, Hashem loves him and that he must always stay from. Because our Super Zaidi was not yet bar mitzvah, he was still very small in size. The Nazis sent him to work underground to build artillery for them. Compounding his previous lung injury, this left him with a cough for the rest of his life.
During the war, he was in the same camps as his two nephews who were his age. His sisters, Chaya, Rivka, and Chana were in another section of the camp when he was liberated. Chana died when an American soldier gave her a bar of chocolate as a kind gesture. Because of her malnutrition, the chocolate gave her stomach issues and she died. He was told that his other sister, Chaya Rivka, died, but he checked each and every medical ward until he, Baruch Hashem, found her. She was barely alive since the Nazis had used her and other women for their blood to give to their own wounded soldiers. Our Super Zaidi stayed by her side, spoon-feeding her anything that he can get his hands on to restore her health. Eventually, the two siblings were sent to Sweden with their two nephews to recuperate. They tried daily to find out if anyone else in their family had survived. It was only years later, while they had emigrated to America and were starting their own families, that they found out that 3 brothers had survived, although losing their first wives and children, and were living in Israel. After the war, you couldn't just go to America. America required each person to have a sponsor in order for them to come to America. Yeshivas Chaim Berlin offered to host and sponsor our Super Zaidi, providing him an opportunity to come and live and learn in America. When the Klausenberger Rebbe heard that our Super Zaidi, a Vishnitzer Chassid, would be going to Chaim Berlin, he told him, Pasnish for a Vishnitzer Chassid to go to Chaim Berlin, and so that's how he ended up learning in the Klausenberg Yeshiva. Our Super Zaidi always kept his promise to his father, and along with our Super Bobby, raised 3 from children, many grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Our great-grandfather, Eliyahu ben Rav Yitzchak Meir and Bela Bram, was born in Pabinitz, Poland. He was one of the youngest in a large family. His appreciation of Yiddishkeit and Hashem's creations remained with him throughout his life. Although he was young when they took him away, he was very strong, and this helped him survive many years in Auschwitz. He refused to talk about his experiences because they were too traumatic. Instead, he talked about his pride in his children and his wife, Devorah. Our great-grandmother, Devorah Bas Rabbi Heichal and Penina Lezman, was born in Chmelnik, Poland. She was the only daughter with 3 brothers. Her father worked in making high-quality shoes and was a very educated man. He was one of the few people in his neighborhood who could read Yiddish and Polish. Because of this, many people came to him to not only read newspapers, but any other important documents that they needed that were in Polish. After the war, Devorah searched for any relative that was alive, but found herself alone. She met our great-grandfather in a DP camp in Germany. The only people at their small wedding were fellow orphan survivors. Those became their extended family, and their friendships continued until their deaths. They were able to eventually go to Israel, where our great-aunt Bela Penina was born. Because of the hardships in Israel and having no family with them, they ended up moving to America. There they united with our great-grandfather's brother, who came to America with his wife he met in the DP camps. His older brother had gone to Australia, and it was a long time until they even found out that he was alive.
Our great-grandmother, Devorah, always felt alone and sad that she had no living relatives. It haunted her and troubled her daily that her maiden name and her family and everyone else would not be remembered. Years after she died, our uncle Shlomo found out at Yad Vashem that she did have a brother who survived and moved to Israel. He too died thinking that he was alone. In fact, on their matzevas, they both said sole survivor. The horrors of the Holocaust were never shared with her family because it was simply too painful for her. When our mother was growing up, she was blessed to have all grandparents close to her. At each Pesach Seder, they would sit together and whisper among themselves about life before and after the Holocaust. All 4 instilled in our mother, and then to us, the importance of being committed to family, Hashem, and having a love for Yiddishkeit. Despite their suffering, they always felt that we were living proof that the Nazis cannot destroy the Jewish people. May their neshamas and the neshamas of all the Kedoshim have an aliyah. They should be a melit yosher for all Klal Yisrael that we should see the Gula Krova.
My great-grandmother, Lisa Rybel, was born in 1930 in Novogradic, which is now in Belarus, but was in Poland at the time. Bubby Lisa had a normal childhood. She went to a Beis Yaakov school. She went to shul regularly, and she had many friends. Bubby Lisa's survival from the Holocaust was nothing short of miraculous. Early on during the war, her mother and older sister were killed by the Nazis. However, because her father was a furrier, the 3 remaining children were able to continue to live in the ghetto that the Nazis set up in her town. When the people in the ghetto heard how Jews in the other ghettos were getting killed, they knew they had to escape. Over the next 5 months, from May to September of 1943, the members of the ghetto dug a tunnel from underneath the building they lived in to outside the ghetto wall. In total, the tunnel was 750 feet long. In September of 1943, in the middle of the night, almost all of the people remaining in the ghetto, including my great-great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, and her sister and brother, escaped from the tunnel. Unfortunately, when they exited the tunnel, her brother ran in the wrong direction and was shot and killed by the Nazis. Bubby Lisa, her father Nachum, and her sister Ray escaped into the forest. Several days later, they were found by the famous Belsky partisans who took them in and cared for them until the war was over. Approximately 15 years ago, my great-grandmother and my grandmother returned to Novogradic for the opening of a small museum to commemorate this great escape. A short film was released about that trip and telling over the story of this great escape.
Hi, I'm Eitan Smilo, 6 out of my great-grandparents endured the horrific and indescribable pains of the Holocaust. But today I will speak about my great-grandmother, Savta Libu. She was born in a town in Czechoslovakia called Silz. She and her family were taken to Auschwitz on Erev Pesach in 1944. She was about 14 years old at the time. Her 2 younger sisters were tragically sent to the gas chambers immediately upon arrival at Auschwitz. She left Auschwitz on the death march when the Nazis marched the prisoners out of the camp in the freezing winter because they were about to be liberated. Unfortunately, most of her family members died along the way, including her mother Miriam, who died on the following Shushan Purim. Savta Libu was liberated on Shavuos of 1945. Only her father and 1 brother survived. She met my great-grandfather while she was still in Europe after the war, and they came to America where she completed high school. She got married to my great-grandfather, for whom I am named, in 1950. My Savta Libu and Saba Bundy lived in Long Island, where they raised 3 boys. My Savta Libu worked as a dental technician and served as the president of the Hank PTA, where their kids went to school. She also worked for a Jewish newspaper selling ads. She now lives today happily and healthy at the age of 93 with 4 generations of family descending from her, including 15 grandchildren and 30 great-grandchildren. May everyone who perished in the Holocaust and Neshama have an Aliyah, Yehi Zichron Baruch.
Rav Rose, Ravav, for being mitzaref, setting this up. At a chasana of number 21 out of 23 of what we call the cousins in my family, second cousins who are really first cousins. My Savta and my Saba were able to escape with a group of 6. Mixed family, my Saba and Savta were second cousins. It's as Hasidish as it gets. But it was a big miracle that they were able to escape with just about half of their siblings. And then between 9 children, 23 grandchildren. So at Chasana number 21, which was like an end point, they were all the children, grandchildren, and now a bunch of great-grandchildren to the point where I don't want to say. And we all got together for a picture. And it was an unbelievable moment. This is about 4 years ago. Baruch Hashem, the vast majority, Shomer Shab is beautiful. My coat is the longest at the Chasana. But they're all saying, what should we say in the picture? What should we say? And they're all saying, like, Mazel Tov, da-da-da-da. And I screamed out in my hat and Bekasha, take that, Hitler. And everyone's like, what? I mean, the right chevra laughed. I want to defend that statement, or what can be seen as a joke. Because in the end, that is what we shouted. On September 30th, 1942, Hitler, Yamach Shemo, got up in what was going to be called the Winter Push. Things were actually not looking good for them for the first time. And he wanted to give chizuk to Germany. He ended up saying, speaking about his prophecy, said, the Jews in Germany once laughed at my prophecies. They're not laughing anymore today. So no matter what the Jews are able to do and make war on the entire world, no matter what happens, even if they take that war from country to country, we have succeeded in spreading the anti-Semitism, the truth he called it, so that no matter what happens, no Jew will laugh again.
my mom used to say about my Savta, I was a kid, so this is how I was able to see it. You know, Savta doesn't smile. Savta doesn't laugh. And everyone around, all the adults would say, yeah, Savta, she doesn't smile, she doesn't laugh. But I always said, that's not true. I see her smiling and laughing all the time. And I was like, no. I was like, no, I really do. Watch. And I walked in. I would walk into the room where Savta was sitting with her company, and I would just do something, and all of a sudden, a smile would break on her face, and I would say something funny, I guess, and she would laugh. My mother couldn't understand it. This is her mother-in-law. And I've looked through all the pictures. She's not smiling in any picture. But in my mind, she's always smiling. There's one story I've shared with you. When they were able to smuggle their way out of the ghetto and hide in the forest for the beginning of what would be years in the forest. So she tried to keep account. She was the oldest sister. She tried to keep account of the calendar where they were holding in the Luach. And it came closer to Yom Kippur, and she took her little brother, and they were only allowed to go out of the trees when it was dark at night. Otherwise, they could be spotted. And they were so dirty, but she knew that Yom Kippur was coming, and she wanted to clean herself off. So Yom Kippur is a day where you're clean. So she decided that she would go out in the night. Now understand, it has to be a clouded night, in the woods, where there's water and Nazis. So she was scared out of her mind. And she got to where she knew the water was, and all of a sudden, and when she tells it, she says it was the worst thing. Lightning flashed in the distance, and the whole sky lit up. And she said she almost had a heart attack. But she said, but then she realized that she was able to see exactly where the water was, and she would get closer, and then lightning would go off again, and she could see where the water was even more, and she was able to clean herself and her brother without getting into any physical danger. But she would always tell it over as something very scary. Mamish Yad Hashem. Lightning helps you see the whole true horizon for what it really is. You can behold that even though things are about to get much darker, there's going to be a future that's going to be unbelievable. Savta, it was very hard for her to see that. But when she saw me and my brother and my sister and all the other 20 cousins, she smiled and she laughed. Because that was when she realized, oh, the lightning shows me the future. The future is unbelievable. Because then in the future, we're going to be able to laugh. Hitler, Yamach Shemo, said we'll never be able to laugh. He's wrong. To the point where you can say, take that Hitler with all of the great-grandchildren, and it's funny. Because schok means you know there is hope. You know that there is something better on the horizon. To be a Yid means to look to the future, to see simcha in even the darkest places. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu help us see that light, that horizon, as soon as possible, and we'll be able to say shalom once again to all those that were taken from us.
One of the reasons why Yom HaShoah this year in particular is perhaps more profound than most years is because of what happened on October 7th. As I'm sure many of us know, October 7th was the worst day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Please direct your attention to the video screen as we look at one Holocaust survivor as she gives us her perspective on that.
The hell is here again. The horror is here again.
Rose Lipsick has been watching the ongoing horror in the Middle East with fear and deep sadness.
It's like the nightmares of my childhood are back. The horror that I went through is becoming so real now to me. How could that happen again?
Saturday's attack by Hamas on Israel has been called the deadliest day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. Lipsick is a Holocaust survivor.
I cannot see how this could have happened again. I cannot believe that humans are capable to such a horrors.
The events of the last few days have been bringing back memories and keeping Lipsick awake at night.
I remember how my mother said to me, "Run, my child, because we're going to our death." And how she pushed me off the road. And she couldn't believe that the whole world has gone mad. There's going to be somebody somewhere that's going to help me. She didn't believe that the whole world is crazy.
While the world is watching the conflict unfold, Lipsick says for survivors of the Holocaust, it is particularly traumatic.
The memories are back. The dreams are back. The horror is back.
We have the incredible opportunity now to hear from someone who saw it firsthand. Mrs. Marlit Waldel, who's here with us to share her story about what she went through during the Holocaust. And when I think about Mrs. Waldel and all that she's gone through and the Kiddush Hashem that she lives today, I think about something that happened to me a few years ago when I was volunteering for Chai Lifeline. And I was sitting in a hospital room with a boy who had a brain tumor, an 11-year-old boy. And Rachmana litzlan, this boy was very, very sick. And this 11-year-old boy looked at me, trying to take his mind off of the pain that he's going through, watching some YouTube videos. And the boy looked at me and he said, "You know I'm not going to die, right?" And I looked at him and I said, I know you're not going to die. And he said, "You know why I'm not going to die?" I said, "Why aren't you going to die?" He said, "I'm not going to die because there are kids in my class who are bullied and I'm there to protect them. And if I die, no one's going to be there to protect them." And while this certainly speaks to the strength of this 11-year-old kid, who Baruch Hashem is alive and well today, doing very well, I can't help but think of Mrs. Waldel. I can't help but think about the strength of the Jewish people. That even though throughout our history there have been so many cancers, so many persecutions, so many crusades, so many holocausts, so many people who wanted to kill every single person in this room, we continue to thrive, we continue to survive, and we continue to bring Hashem into the world. Because we have a purpose to fulfill. We have a mission to fulfill. We can't die as a tzibor, we can't die as a klal, because we still have to be mekadeshim shemaim in everything that we do and in everything that we are. And that's who Mrs. Waldel is. She's not just someone who survived the Holocaust, which certainly is incredible in and of itself, but she's someone who continues each and every day of her life to be mekadeshim shemayim and to bring the Ribono Shel Olam into the world. So please give our undivided attention to Mrs. Waldel.
Hello. I hope you all hear me. Can you hear me? In the back? All right. I'm very glad to meet you all, beautiful young Jewish children. And everything that was done till now on this program, I was very impressed with. I was very impressed with the talking of the young men here, of their histories. And all of what they said was true, and I went through all of that, including the video you just saw, because I was in Jerusalem on October 7th at the table on Shmini Atzeres when my young grandson, under 30, was called away from the Yom Tov table to go immediately to the forces to protect Israel. Can you all hear me there? Can you hear? So I went full circle. I want to ask you a question. How many of you think they know when the World War II started? Raise your hand, please, and speak loud because my hearing isn't too good. What year do you think the war started? Raise your hand. Anybody ventures? Yes, what year? 1939. Okay, pretty close, pretty close. Did you hear 1939? Any other comments? What year did the war start? I'm going full circle. You see me here, I'm 90, almost 94 years old. Chanukah Mietz Hashem, I'll be 94. I was born in the end, Chanukah 1930, and I'll tell you briefly my first anti-Semitic experience in Germany, where I was born, was at the ripe age of 5. I felt extremely anti-Semitism, but I didn't know what it was. I thought I committed a crime. I didn't know what it was. What did I commit that I am so discriminated against? I'm a pariah and all that, and I still remember it vividly. At the age of 5, I contracted diphtheria from my brother who was treated at home. I was the 4th child of 5 children, middle-class Jewish family in Stettin, Germany, and I needed hospitalization because I had high temperature, and they had no penicillin in those years yet. And no Jew was admitted in 1935 to a German hospital, which were the only ones existing at the time, and my life was in danger. So with a lot of protection, which means a pull, my pediatrician was able, through his connections, to get me admitted to the hospital. By the way, my Jewish pediatrician was not allowed to practice in Germany anymore except to treat Jewish patients. He was not allowed to treat Aryan patients, nor use the hospital. I was taken by a private ambulance that my father had to supply because a Jew would contaminate even the ambulance in 1935. I was taken into a separate room. I was kept in isolation. My toys that my family kept sending were confiscated. I never saw them. I was not allowed company. And I felt a 5-year-old child committed a crime. I didn't know what crime it was. And it was the fact that I was born Jewish. And the same treatment would have been to those that pretended they were not Jews, because Hitler made sure that all the connecting of Jews, whether they intermarry or not, were still Jewish. My life was saved in the hospital. I got back home. And I was, I told you, I believe, the 4th child of 5 children's family. And we lived in a protective life. We had by that time, our own lower schools, Hebrew schools, because no Jewish child was able to go to a German school anymore. And one night in 1938, October, which was the month before Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht happened on November 1939, a month before the Gestapo came late at night into our apartment and took us out. I don't want to make a story short. Our time is limited. My parents were coming home late at night. They saw light in the living room. We were home with a babysitter, and I was asleep. It was late at night, and my father saw light in the living room. He told my mother they probably after men taking them to work camps. So he ran away, and my mother went upstairs to face the Gestapo. She didn't know it would be Gestapo there. And the Gestapo men said, "We're waiting for you. Dress the children, wake them up, and take them to police headquarters. You'll be back soon. Just take your papers." So my mother woke up 5 children, the youngest being 5, and I was not yet 8, and the oldest being maybe 14 years old. And she dressed them in a coat. It was cold outside, and walked out of the apartment, never to be able to come back again, 1938 October, and never to be able to see her husband or our father again. The war took my father and took my younger brother, who was 3 years younger than I. My younger brother was taken with the children in concentration camp and never to be heard of again. My father was shot in 1942 in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Every 10th man out for some appraisal, and he was the lucky 10th man, and they shot him. And records of these are kept. Germans kept very good records. We were able to receive it eventually through the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., the exact details. Now, we were shipped overnight to Poland, and Poland didn't want to admit us, and we were a number of probably 30 families at least who were Ostjuden, which was Galicia-born Jews who were never able to become German citizens, because in Germany you cannot become German easily. And Poland didn't acknowledge us, so we were stateless, and nobody wanted us. In 1938, nobody wanted Jews. We couldn't go anywhere. But to try and make it short, we did get finally admitted, and our people from Stettin, Germany, wound up in Radom, Poland. In Radom, Poland, we spent, anybody heard of Radom, Poland here? No. Okay, it's not so far from Warsaw, and we spent there the war years, meaning, and a lot of details, how we managed to stay there and how we survived. And eventually we went with the Polish Jews into the Polish ghetto in Radom, which was made always smaller. So imagine this room, every few weeks, was made smaller, so you would have to sit closer to each other, meaning living closer together. The living quarters in the ghettos kept changing because they kept taking out Jews for work camps, and older Jews to death and younger children away. We spent 2 years in the Warsaw ghetto in the Radom ghetto, and then we were sent to concentration camps, those who remained in the ghetto. Ghetto was liquidated, and there we were separated, men and women, and from there our journey began even worse than in Radom ghetto, which was bad enough, and I have a lot of details in my book. I'll tell you about my book. I wrote my book here, and the cover is very important. My book costs $15, but it's only available through me. I haven't given it to any stores yet, and I don't intend to, because I think it's only relevant to people who know me and to hear me, and I speak a lot to schools. We were separated, men and women. My 2 brothers were separated. One of them was killed. The other survived the war, and we were reunited after the war. He was in Italy. My mother, my sister, and I were never apart. Although my mother was older, and I was too young, she was too old. My sister was almost right. She was 2 years older than I. They didn't need old people, they didn't need young people. They needed workers for hard labor. We did any hard labor you can imagine from each. I was in 9 concentration camps, including the one the rabbi spoke about, the 3 of his family. And we did the hardest labor possible under the worst conditions imaginable. There was no food, no proper sanitation conditions, no proper sleeping conditions, no proper clothing. And we worked in coal mines, salt mines, ammunition factories, and all the hard labor. We made roads, and you wouldn't believe it. Now, I was not allowed to be a child, so I was protected by my mother and my sister from 2 sides. And with their help and with God's help and a miracle, I somehow survived. We 3 survived all the camps, and each one was worse than another. Now you'll ask me why 9 camps. The Germans specialized in separating families and separating friends and dislocating us. It made us, every time they moved us from one camp to another, it was different environment, different adjustment, And they wanted to kill our spirits, which family would have kept alive. And most people lost their families. And I was lucky enough to have my mother and my sister spiritually and physically supporting me the entire time, both with food, with emunah, and with labor. And I was sort of between them, hidden by them, supported by them on the hours of Appellplatz, which means standing outside, and the worst conditions that you can imagine. All the books that I've read about Holocaust survivors are true, and all of them have different experiences. Each survivor is here by a miracle. Each one has a different story. And I was in the gas chamber in Auschwitz when the cyclone gas failed through either the sabotage or pipe damage, and we walked out of the crematorium after we were supposed to be dead and burned. And I think it is one of the 2 stories of Auschwitz that the crematorium failed. They gassed millions of people. They gassed them and then they burned them, and the prisoners who had to attend to that were changed quite often and then they were burned in turn. But here, I never spoke about the Holocaust. I came to America from my brother who was a soldier. It's a very long story. He was an American soldier. He was able to bring my mother and his remaining siblings to America in 1946, Pesach time, 1946, 15th of April, 1946, we came to America. I went to high school, and we have 3, on the cover of my book, is 3 women's faces and 3 women's arms, which is the concentration camp numbers on our arms from Auschwitz-Birkenau, and it is consecutive. Consecutively, it's one after another. And I think no relatives with consecutive numbers are alive, because there were no relatives kept together. I never would acknowledge that my mother was my mother. I called her by her first name because we were technically, legally not allowed to be related to each other. So they were my angels and protectors, and it's a miracle that 3 surviving relatives, a mother and 2 daughters, survived with consecutive concentration camp numbers on their arm. Now, I went in 1946, we came to Brooklyn, and it was the first home that I had since 1938, October 1938, because on the go from 38 on, I never had a home where I could live with my family, and that's a long story. We were very happy in that home, and I went to Abraham Lincoln High School in Brooklyn, New York, my sister and I, and when my classmates asked me, what is the number on your arm? Take a guess, I want to hear hands, what I might have answered them not wanting to talk about the Holocaust. Any guesses? What would I say, what the number on my arm is, to a class of high school students who knew very little or nothing about the Holocaust? What might I have said? For somebody who didn't want to talk about the Holocaust, but I had to give an answer. Any thoughts, any suggestions? Raise your hand. If not, I have to tell you. Nobody guesses? It's a good riddle. What? Very good, very good. Date of birth. Anybody else? Yes. Phone number. Say it again. Phone number. Your phone number. Stand up. Stand up. Phone number. Excellent. Excellent. Very close. I told them this is my telephone number, and they really believed it, and the conversation was ended, and I did not speak. I never spoke about the Holocaust. My sister, 2 years older than I, spoke about the Holocaust all of her lifetime, constantly, daily. She had 4 children. They grew up with the Holocaust on their table every day. And I would not be able to talk about it. I did not, because I thought nobody would believe me, and nobody's interested. That's as simple as that. And it took about 20 years events of history that made me realize that I ought to talk. I have an obligation to talk. There are many Holocaust deniers that that claim it's not there. So it was my call to talk. So I am a talker. And I spoke a lot. I lived in Israel on and off. During my retirement age, I spoke at Yad Vashem. I speak to birthright people at Yad Vashem. They're very interested. They know nothing. I speak here in my last 7 years that I live in Monsey. I speak to a lot of schools like yours. I spoke 2 times to MTA High School, different years, on a program called Names and Numbers. They have a very good program. And I speak to yeshivas, junior and senior high schools. And it's getting harder for me to speak. It's a big effort. And I still feel when somebody calls me that it's my obligation today. And as far as writing a book, I never ever thought that I would write. My sister wrote all her lifetime. She wrote a book. She got a master's in creative writing just so she could write the book, and she has a fantastic memory, and she is the best teller or the best writer of any Holocaust story. I find all the stories are true. I told you that before. And many, many miracles happened to me, to us. To stay alive every day in the years that I went through camp was an effort. Every day was a miracle, every day was an effort, and we wound up on the death march from Auschwitz-Birkenau, and I don't have the time to tell you everything, but miracles happened throughout the time. And I thank you for listening, and I will, if the time allows, I'll welcome questions. Does the time allow? I don't know your schedule. And I wish you lots of luck. I'm giving you a wholesale brocha. You should all be matzliach. You should graduate Gesundheit. You should have a brilliant future. Most of all, family, family, family is most important. It's what sustains you, what feeds you like bread and butter. And good luck to you all.
As we conclude the program, in Eretz Yisrael every year, on both Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron, there's a siren that goes off. No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, cars pull over, as we'll see in the video, to the side of the highway. Everyone stops what they're doing to focus on and think about those who died in the Holocaust. So as you play the video now, as we play the siren right now, let's please have in mind the 6.5 million Jews who were killed, Rachmana litzlan, by the Nazis in Mach Shemam, and the many descendants that could have been. Before we ask Rabbi Staum to come up and say a kapitel of Tehillim for the victims of the Holocaust, I'd like to see if there are any questions for Mrs. Waldel. Her story was certainly very powerful. Any questions about her story in particular or about the Holocaust in general, please raise your hand. You can sit down if you want.
Ask loud. What my family did?
When things started getting very serious in Germany, why did your family not leave?
Okay, good question. Those who could leave, both physically and financially, tried to leave. Many of my family left, and those who left went to Palestine at the time and to America, and they did survive. Hardship, but they did survive. My father had young children, and he wanted to go to Holland with his pregnant wife who expected a fifth child, my mother, my younger brother, and she did not want to leave her family. She needed to have her siblings, her sisters and family around her, so she did not want to go to Holland. Had they gone to Holland, they might have been just as dangerous because the Holland Jews had it bad. Can you hear me? So there was nowhere to go. The truth is nobody wanted Jews. And I'm sure those who financially and in their mind could see themselves going left. But it wasn't easy to leave. You needed a lot of money. You couldn't have little children that needed care. And it was hardship. Nobody wanted Jews. Nobody wanted Jews before the war. Nobody wanted Jews during the war. Nobody wanted Jews after the war. We had a lot of trouble arriving in America. It's not like today where the Spanish people come in on buses load and they're given everything. My brother had to supply financial documents for every person that was brought in, and he had to have proof that we had where to live and what to live from, and not the government. You know, it wasn't easy even to come. In 1946, April 15, we arrived as a preferred quota of an American soldier. My oldest brother was an American soldier, and he was bringing his mother and his siblings to America and not asking America to support them. So nobody wanted Jews ever. The only country in the whole world that welcomes Jews, please remember that, till today, is Israel. Israel is the only country that welcomes Jews and gives them a lot of support, more support than any country ever gave Jews. So that is really not that they didn't want to leave, not that they didn't realize. My parents, I'm sure, realized the danger to some extent, couldn't imagine what it would be like, but to some extent. And to tear yourself away from the family support and to tear yourself away, you needed a lot of courage, a lot of money, and very few people have that much courage. You know, it's a problem.
Any other questions for Mrs. Waldel?
Was there something specific that made you want to tell your story? Did something happen that made you?
Constantly. What is your name? Joshua. Joshua's asking any specific. Every day, every hour was specific. Believe me, I was occupied all day long trying to survive the next minute, not just the next hour. It's unbelievable, you know, that people could be totally preoccupied with just staying alive. Miracles happened every minute. To give you an example, a little fast example, in the Radom ghetto, my brother and I, we were young children, and there was a razzia, means they were picking up children. To make the ghetto smaller, they were picking up children. One day children, one day older people, one day laborers. It's always different. And my mother knew that they were picking up children. We were in danger. So she made arrangements for a caretaker of a leather factory in Radom, which Radom was known for, to hide us on the roof in the leather factory. roof, which was outside the ghetto. So my little brother, 3 years younger than I, we were children. It was maybe 1940, 1941, so I was maybe 10 years old and he was 7. We walked out of the ghetto as though we were Aryan children. We didn't look Jewish. Somehow managed to walk out of the ghetto, and we walked toward the leather factory, and there the caretaker put us on the roof, under the roof of the leather factory. He kept us there a few days in hiding, and then he came to us, the Nazis are coming with dogs to look for hidden Jews. We have to leave. And we too had to walk out in the middle of the night, away from the area of the ghetto. And if I tell you that we walked, my little brother and I walked, children, forget about the phone. Should I close it or forget? We walked 1 week. I don't know where we walked. I don't know which angel showed us the way. We had no food. We had not adequate clothing. And we walked away to farmer's house, who also had dogs. Can you hear me? Yeah. The farmers' houses had dogs, and we had to be, so we slept in the barns if we could access them, or in the field. And we ate whatever was edible on the ground, whether it was potatoes or whatever. How we survived that week, I don't know. The razzia was supposed to, razzia means assortment, whatever, bed, was supposed to take place about a week. My mother told me, come back in a week, wherever you were hidden. And we found our way back to the ghetto. How we found ourselves out of that place, how we found our way back without being caught and with surviving is a miracle. I mean, these miracles happen day by day, if I tell you. And many people survived, some survived, and most of them did not. And the support is mainly family. Does it answer your question? There are miracles like this constantly. The gas chamber was another miracle. There are hundreds of miracles that happen to us every day. And it just is too long to tell, you know. Any other questions?
We have time for one more question. We have one final question to ask Mrs. Waldel. Right over here. Do you consider America today to be like what Germany was in 1938?
Well, it's not quite, but it's not that far away. I don't think it's that far away. What's going on the campuses? It started in schools. You heard the question? Who didn't hear the question? The dangers are, certainly. I really don't know the solution, but the fact is that Jews are hated wherever they are. And I don't know why God does that. I'm a religious person. I believe in God. He has his reasons. They can't stand, the world cannot stand the Jews. It's their conscience. The Jews are their conscience which bothers them. It can happen anywhere, anytime. If I tell you we did not know that next moment we'll walk out of your apartment, can you imagine yourself being secure at home and all of a sudden told to leave and never to come back? I mean, it's unimaginable. And it is not that far. In Ukraine it happened recently. Ukraine had things happen. It's not that far from reality, unfortunately. I don't want to make you feel insecure, but Hashem is the only security. I can't give you an answer. The world is not the kindest.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Waldel. Let's please ask Rabbi Stam to come up and say a kapitel of Tehillim as we have in mind the victims of the Holocaust.
Shir malos mima makim kirasicha Adonai. Adonai shema b'koli tiyanos necha kashuvos likol tachanunai. Im avonos tishmor ya Adonai mi amor. Ki imcha aslicha leman tivarei. Ki visi Adonai, ki viso nafshi v'ledvaro ochalti. Nafshi l'Adonai mishomerim laboker, shomerim laboker. Yachel Yisrael el Adonai, ki im Adonai achesed v'arbei mofidos. Veho yiftes Yisrael mikol avonosov.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you to all of the student speakers. Thank you to Jakey Abanaim for picking up Mrs. Wendell in Muncie. And thank you, of course, to Mrs. Wendell for sharing your story with us this morning.